Hello everybody. Today I'm going to talk about remote operations and how I use it on my own layout, the Nickel City line. In today's brief presentation, we're going to be going over the software and hardware requirements for the layout, connecting the layout to the internet, viewing the layout, schedule changes and adjustments for remote operations, advanced paperwork and information sent to our operators, setting up the remote operations session, and running the remote operations session. So let's get to it. Software and hardware required for remote operations include a reliable high-speed internet connection, a PC or Mac computer with a good-sized monitor, preferably 2 monitors, a microphone and headset for the computer, a webcam, which is optional, Zoom conference software for radio communications and layout viewing, TeamViewer conferencing software which allows the dispatcher and yardmaster to access and control those consoles, a separate iPhone, iPad, Android, or tablet that can be used as a throttle using either the Engine Driver Throttle app for Android telephones or the Wii Throttle app for iPhones and iPads. Layout requirements for remote operations includes digital command control system that can handle control of turnouts, block detection, optional signal control, and an interface software such as Java Model Railroad Interface or JMRI. In this example, we have our layout. The first thing we do is connect the DCC command station to the layout, which provides power and a digital signal to our locomotives. Next, we add a turnout motor and a DCC turnout controller, which is connected to the DCC system and operated through the DCC network. Next, we add block detection, which requires placing rail gaps between the different monitored segments of the layout. Each gap is wired into a DCC block detection decoder, which sends its messages back to the DCC command station, letting the user know whether the block is occupied or unoccupied. On the Nickel City line, I use the following equipment as a foundation for remote operations. My preference is Digitrax. However, there are plenty of other great manufacturers of digital control systems out there, and the choice is really up to you. But for me, I use the Digitrax DCS-100 command station, DB210 boosters for supplemental power control, SE8C signal decoders for turnout and signal control. For block detection, I use BDL-168s, and for overcurrent protection, I use Digitrax PM4s. 2 computers control the functions of the Nickel City line layout. The main computer serves as the dispatcher's computer. The second computer controls all functions within the main yard at Nickel City. I use the JMRI software to communicate between each computer and the DCC command station using a local buffer USB manufactured by Railroad Circuits. The local buffer connects between the dispatcher's computer and the DCC command station. The JMRI software sends and receives commands and messages between the PCs and the DCC layout. The yard computer, which is also using JMRI, is connected to the dispatcher's computer through the home computer network and sends and receives JMRI messages and commands through the dispatcher's computer using JMRI's LocoNet over TCP protocols. All communications between either computer run through the single local buffer USB. Let's turn to how a guest operator can connect to the NCL layout over the internet. The first thing guest operators need to have is the IPv4 external address of the layout host's router and the port assignment for the JMRI throttles on the layout. The layout host will provide this information to each guest in advance of a remote operations session. In order for someone to connect to the host layout remotely, the operator must provide the external IPv4 address of their router to the host. The external IPv4 address is how the internet knows where to send and receive data from, sort of like your home address. To obtain your external address, simply open your web browser and type in, "What is my IPv4 address?" The search results will usually provide both the IPv4 and IPv6 results for your router. If you want to know your mobile device's address, simply turn off the Wi-Fi on the mobile device and then open a browser on the device and follow the instructions I just mentioned. Your IPv4 address is needed by the layout hosts so they can allow you access to the JMRI ports and through their firewall. If you are the layout host, you can contact your internet service provider for instructions on how to do this on your home router. Once the layout host has cleared the guest devices through the router and firewall, they can select locomotives on their throttle apps to operate on the layout over the internet. Now let's discuss how we can view the layout remotely. On the NCL layout, I use a mixture of USB webcams, an iPad, and an iPhone to provide remote operators with views of about 80 to 85% of the layout over Zoom conferencing software. I use a 3D printer to create tripod mounts for the iPhone and iPad, and ceiling camera mounts and cable clips for the USB webcams. In the layout room, I have 4 computers and a laptop that push out video from 1 to 3 cameras. In order for a PC to push out multiple webcams as a single camera feed, I use an open source software package called Open Broadcast Software, or OBS. OBS allows me to set up my camera feeds in much the same way as a TV studio pushes video out from a news studio. My multi-camera feeds include 2 window stationary and multi-window sequential scenes. I also use OBS to push out the dispatcher's screen as 6 close-up sequential windows, which aid my remote operators in tracking their train's progress. In order for a guest to control the dispatcher's console remotely, I use TeamViewer software. TeamViewer allows a guest to log directly into the computer and take control of its functions. From the guest's computer, it appears as if the dispatcher software is running on their own PC, and they have full control of all functions as if they were physically present in the layout room. The last item I want to touch on is the use of train cams. I have started to build some experimental train cams using a Raspberry Pi Zero-W with camera, a 5-volt power pack, 3D printed mounting brackets, and a deep well container car. I am piping these videos through the JMRI web server. So far, the train cam views have received great reviews from my remote operators. In order for remote operations to be successful, I had to adjust my operating scheme to accommodate the logistics of each session. Normally, I operate with 9 to 12 operators, but for remote operations I started with 3, a dispatcher and 2 engineers. As I brought more operators online, I added a 3rd engineer, and eventually a 4th. At this point in time, with myself as the sole occupant in the layout room, 5 remote operators per session is sufficient. Sessions were reduced from my normal 4-hour session to 1.5 to 2 hours. I also eliminated the time-based schedule and went to sequential operations, moving a number of trains into new positions to accommodate remote ops. I also eliminated the use of the fast clock. The number of trains run per session was reduced from 14 to between 4 and 6 trains. Local trains were limited to 1 per session. Extra passenger and freight trains were eliminated. Track warrants and the use of my equipment defect detector were canceled. At the present time, the yard position is not operated remotely. These changes are necessary since I am the only one in the room serving as the train master, yard master, brakeman, conductor, and chief Gandy dancer. Prior to each session, I provide a number of documents to my remote operators which aid them in performing their work. The operators have access to crew assignments, switch lists, train routing diagrams, remote ops instructions, and camera locations. I also provide a number of supplemental documents about the layout, including a track plan and track schematic, dispatcher instructions, and other reference materials to help everyone feel comfortable in a remote environment. All these documents are available online on my Layouts website. When setting up the remote ops session, I make sure that I send out all the read-ahead documents, crew assignments, and login info several days in advance. I also do a complete layout cleaning and check of all equipment, electrical components, and locomotives. I run each train at least once or twice prior to the session and correct any deficiencies. I test all computers and hardware fully at least a day before the session and address any issues. For the session, I keep copies of key documents handy for reference. I power up the layout and all systems approximately 2 hours prior to the session. I start the Zoom meeting 1 hour prior and set up all the layout cameras and train cams. One computer serves as the Zoom host. The other computers simply join the meeting. The host computer also provides the connection between the two-way FRS radio and the audio for the Zoom meeting. I use a Dingotel USB audio adapter to make the connection between the FRS radio and the computer. The Dingotel adapter switches the microphone and audio output functions from the radio into the computer, allowing the mic function of the computer to access the speaker function of the radio and vice versa. FRS radio is set to the Vox function and operates in that mode in order to transmit across the radio network and communicate with the other remote operators on Zoom. I have all remote systems running at least 30 minutes prior to the session. As operators and dispatchers log in, approximately 15 minutes prior to the start of the session, I have them connect their throttles to the layout and make sure that we don't have any technical issues. If all goes well, and we still have time remaining before the start of the session, everyone has a chance to socialize a bit and get reacquainted and talk about what they're doing in the model railroad world. At the start of the session, everyone mutes their microphone and only unmutes them when they need to transmit. When the session starts, the train master or traffic supervisor will call the crews on duty and then hand them off to the dispatcher. As the host, I monitor the progress and make suggestions when needed to improve efficiency of the session. I also assist with switching operations as needed. And finally, at the conclusion, I hold a short wrap-up where everybody can talk about the session, any improvements needed, or what they really enjoyed about it. Now let's take a brief glimpse at a remote operating session on the NCL.
Take it back another car length over. Brakeman 502T to engineer, go ahead and hold right there. We're in the clear. I'm realigning track 2. And we're good there. We can sit there for a minute.
Roger, holding here, 502T engineer.
NCL 421 answering dispatch, over.
421, you'll be happy to know that we now can have you depart Nichols City Yard over to Shepherdsfield. And in Shepherdsfield, we're going to line you up for Main 2 in Shepherdsfield. You have an Amtrak coming in the other direction, which will be on track 1. Over.
NCL 421, Roger, line to Shepherdsfield, track number 2, waiting for Amtrak.
Copy that.
Dispatcher, this is Amtrak 650. I'm just pulling into Shepherdsfield.
I have you on my board. Thank you, Amtrak 650. And I'm going to need you to hold there because I've got another train extra of 421 coming at you the other way.
Here are a couple of final thoughts concerning remote operations. Try to hold as many sessions as you can so that crews can become comfortable with the remote operating format. It is quite different from regular operating sessions, and the more you do, the better they'll be at it. Keep the sessions fun and interesting. Keep the sessions at no more than 2 hours. I found that this is generally as long as anyone wants to stay in front of a computer. Don't be afraid to seek out advice on remote operations. I certainly did, and I don't claim to be one who knows everything about how this is done. And while what I do works for me, it may not work exactly for you, but hopefully I've inspired some new thoughts and ways of thinking about how you might accomplish remote operations on your layout. And finally, don't be afraid to take a risk. I found remote operations has become very enjoyable the more we do it and the more we play around with the format. Both my operators and I enjoy getting together a couple of times a week and running some trains, switching some industries, and just having a general good time. It's a great way to make the best of the current situation that we're in. I thank you for your time. This has been my presentation on remote operations on the NCL, and I thank you very much for watching.